Instacart is on a mission to have you not leave the couch this basketball season. Because between the pre-game rituals and the post-game interviews, it can be difficult to find time for everything else. So let Instacart take care of your game day snacks or weekly restocks and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Because we hear it's bad luck to be hungry on game day. So download the Instacart app today and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Service fees apply for 3 orders in 14 days, excludes restaurants.
We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature. Whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes, nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With All Trails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And I guess today, just to kind of start the week, I want to do something of a kind of a roundup of where we are. Now, the nature of events at the moment, particularly involving Trump and Iran, are so fast-paced that it becomes very difficult to keep up. And by the time you're listening to this, if you're listening to this later today, it might already be out of date. That's the issue when suddenly you talk about history and then you can't divorce real world context, or you can't divorce real world context from history, and vice versa. There's no point, absolutely no point at all, talking about the Wall Street crash or D-Day if you're going to ignore the seminal events of the moment, which have obviously long historical roots, and it would make it for a kind of very dry, I think, and particularly irrelevant podcast. But at the moment, we have another complication in addition to this kind of frenetic pace of things, and that is the chaotic nature of Donald Trump. Now, who says one thing one day and does something else the next. There is a school of thought that suggests that his kind of statement last week that he was going to give around, he was going to think for 2 weeks, ponder, if you will, on what he was going to do about Iran, and then 48 hours later, he strikes at Iran, an operation that takes longer than 48 hours to plan, I will wager. And there's a school of thought that suggests, well, he was always playing the long game, and he's doing this Nixonian sort of madman routine, of complete unpredictability. Maybe. And maybe he just changes his mind from one moment to the next, depending on who he's talking to. And I suspect that's kind of closer to the truth. Now, if Trump operates erratically, American empire itself doesn't, just as the British Empire didn't, and other empires didn't. They have a kind of a way of functioning. The criticism in the Western world of kind of the long-term vision of many Western countries, America included, it is that very often that vision isn't there, and Western societies and Western nations have become increasingly more sort of short-termist and reactive. To some extent, that is true. However, the American vision, the American obsession with Iran, which has been ongoing since 1979, arguably beforehand, is the threat. They're obsessed with the threat. Whatever else one thinks of Iran, it's certainly not a pleasant regime at all. But there is the threat of an independent sovereign nation that doesn't answer to American demands. Interestingly, didn't fall neatly after 1979 into a Soviet sphere of influence either. The Soviets were very, very dubious about Iran and the Ayatollah. But you have, in this kind of very sensitive region of the world, an independent sovereign state that is quite resistant to American imperialism, quite insulated from it. And that's what is dangerous about Iran as far as the United States is concerned. That's why Iran has, and it's kind of quite an easy sell to the American public, that this is a kind of a monstrous regime following the kind of the embassy, the storming of the embassy and the taking of hostages in 1979. I'm going to read from an essay today by the academic Michael Hudson on why. It's actually by an academic, Eve Smith, but it's drawn from Michael Hudson's work, entitled "Why America is at War with Iran." The article reads, and Michael Hudson, by the way, is a research professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and a research associate at the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College. And his latest book is The Destiny of Civilization. Okay. So it reads, opponents of the war with Iran say that the war is not in American interests, seeing that does not pose any visible threat, seeing as it does not pose any visible threat to the United States. This appeal to reason misses the neocon logic that has guided US foreign policy for more than half a century, and which is now threatening to engulf the Middle East in the most violent war since Korea. That logic is so aggressive, so repugnant to most people, so much in violation of the basic principles of international law, the United Nations, and the US Constitution, that there is an understandable shyness in the authors of this strategy to spell out what is at stake. Now, just to kind of hop out of that for a moment, I would never knowingly quote on this podcast Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay? Certainly not. The kind of the absolute most kind of extreme and crude example of the MAGA kind of cult. And yet, I'm about to. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the kind of poster girl for MAGA-ism, said on Twitter yesterday, every time America is on the verge of greatness, we get involved in another foreign war. There would not be bombs falling on Israel if Netanyahu had not dropped bombs on the people of Iran first. Israel is a nuclear-armed nation. This is not our fight. Peace is the answer. Now, sometimes I do wonder kind of what sort of parallel dimension I've accidentally wandered into when Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Jewish space lasers woman, is saying things that are objectively true. And you know, you don't have to be a forensic historian to work this one out. Israel attacked Iran, and Israel is a nuclear-armed state, and Iran, at the moment, is not. Israel committed what was defined at Nuremberg as the supreme international crime, a preemptive attack on another country. There are all sorts of kind of arguments around 9/11 put around by the disreputable Alan Dershowitz, among others, about the idea of preemption, of why it's okay to act first. So the logic of the neocons is reprehensible, not just to liberal Americans and to liberal and left people around the world, but even to the MAGA base. And it's a kind of a great misunderstanding to lump them and the neocons in together. The neocons are happy to export violence around the world, and it's not that Trump supporters are above bombing Muslim, Arab, and Arab countries and Iran. Far from it. They don't want their communities to see hundreds, if not thousands, of mutilated and mauled working class Americans returning from the fight. They look at Iraq and recognize that whilst it's not particularly difficult, that they were sold a pup and made fools of, and that there was essentially no good reason for it, and at the same time watch the communities continue to crumble, which is a huge source of working class resentment. So neocon ideology isn't even shared by a majority of Americans. It's a kind of a hobby horse of a very narrow, undemocratic foreign policy think tank elite. And they are not just Republican. Far from it. Kamala Harris, there's this kind of naive idea that had Kamala Harris won, then a new era of world peace would have been ushered in. Her foreign policy objectives included doing something about Iran. Would she have done it with this degree of kind of impulsivity and incompetence? Probably not, but that's not saying very much. So Michael Hudson continues. What is at stake is the US attempt to control the Middle East and its oil as a buttress of US economic power, and to prevent other countries moving to create their own autonomy from the US-centered neoliberal order administered by the IMF, the World Bank, and other international institutions to reinforce US unipolar power. Around 1974 or 1975, there was much talk of a creation of a new international economic order. I was working at the Hudson Institute with Herman Kahn on international finance and trade, and he brought me to sit in on a military strategy discussion of plans being made already at that time, possibly to overthrow Iran and to break it up into ethnic parts. This was when Iran was a US client state under the Shah. Herman found the weakest spot to be Baluchistan on Iran's northeast border with Pakistan. The Kurds, Tajiks, and Turkic Azerbaijanis and others whose ethnicities were to be played off against each other, giving the US diplomacy a key potent client dictatorship to reshape Iranian and Pakistani political orientation if need be. 3 decades later, by 2003, General Wesley Clark pointed to Iran as being the capstone of 7 countries that the United States needed to control in order to dominate the Middle East, starting with Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan, and culminating in Iran. Most of the discussion of the geopolitical dynamics of how the international economy is changing is understandably focused on attempts by the BRICS countries and others to escape from US control by de-dollarizing their trade and investment. But the most active dynamic reshaping the international economy has been Donald Trump's whirlwind presidency since January, which has been there to lock up other countries into a US-centered economy by agreeing not to focus their trade and investment on China, Russia, and other states seeking their own autonomy from US control. That's what this war with Iran is all about. So, creating a wider picture here. Trump's tariffs, Trump's attempt to strong arm other countries in a mafia style, going to Europe and Asia and saying, basically, and South America, and saying, I'm going to punish you a bit now, and you need to give me big concessions to make the punishment go away. And if you don't, the punishment is going to get a lot bigger. But people are less scared of the gangster than they used to be. And that is unfortunately a big hole in the strategy.
We all belong outside. We're drawn to nature, whether it's the recorded sounds of the ocean we doze off to, or the succulents that adorn our homes. Nature makes all of our lives, well, better. Despite all this, we often go about our busy lives removed from it. But the outdoors is closer than we realize. With AllTrails, you can discover trails nearby and explore confidently. With offline maps and on-trail navigation, download the free app today.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Trump expected that countries would respond to his threat to create tariff chaos in hope of regaining the US market by reaching an agreement not to trade with China and indeed to accept US trade and financial sanctions against it, Russia, Iran, and other countries deemed to be a threat to the unipolar US global order. This fight explains the US objective in its current fight with Iran, as well as with Russia and China and Cuba, Venezuela, and countries seeking to restructure their economic policies to recover their independence. From the view of US strategists, the emergence of China's industrial socialism poses an existential danger to the US unipolar control in providing a model that other countries might seek to join to recover the national sovereignty that has been steadily eroded in recent decades. China is presenting itself as a very, very compelling example, and this is a problem. This is a huge problem in an age particularly of Instagram and TikTok, when visual evidence of living standards in China are abundantly and easily clear. Of course, visual images don't capture the full truth, and no doubt there is all sorts of pockets of poverty here and there. But in general, China is not known for its street sleepers. China is not known for its high school shootings. China is not known for its crumbling infrastructure. In fact, quite the opposite. And so the claim that American capitalism is the only game in town is slowly but surely becoming increasingly hollow. And the idea that was propagated in the most successful propaganda campaign in human history, that a socialist country cannot and would not function economically or socially, is really starting to fall apart. To call China exclusively a socialist country is obviously, there's a lot more nuance and complexity there, but we'll kind of engage with that with another time. but the vision that America projects, which is really a kind of a huge part of American soft power that is being retreated from by the Trump administration. The idea of the American way of life, and America is the bastion of these ideas of kind of freedom. There's little to sort of support these claims, increasingly little. The Biden administration and a host of US cold warriors frame the issue as being between democracy, defined as countries supporting US policy as client regimes, and autocracy, seeking national self-reliance from foreign trade and financial dependency. This way of framing the international economy views China as an existential threat to the US unipolar domination, and that attitude explains the US-NATO attack on Russia in the Ukraine war of attrition. Here's where things run aground a little bit. To describe the invasion of the Ukraine, in which Ukrainians have died, children have been kidnapped, entire communities have been destroyed, women have been raped, and crimes against humanity have been perpetrated, as a US NATO attack on Russia, I think is disingenuous, to say the least. Is it fair to say that NATO encroachment on Russia created the conditions for this to occur? Yes, but part of the security guarantees given to Ukraine when Ukraine became independent and handed over its nuclear weapons was that there would be some kind of security umbrella from NATO should Russia ever attack. Otherwise, they would never have done such a thing. So the idea of America and NATO provoking Russia by establishing itself on Russian borders, there is something in that. But then again, Ukraine's sort of interest in facing westwards and joining the European Union and joining NATO makes an awful lot of sense when you consider the history that exists between Russia and Ukraine. So I don't give that one a free pass, to be honest with you.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
Epic views, waterfall mists, summit sunsets. It's all better outside. And with All Trails, you can discover the best of nature with over 450,000 trails around the world. Download the free app today and find your next adventure.
The motivation has nothing to do with Iran's attempt to protect its national sovereignty by developing an atom bomb. The basic problem is that the United States has taken the initiative in trying to preempt Iran and other countries from breaking away from dollar hegemony. The evidence seems to suggest that Iran, whilst probably trying to create an atomic weapon, is a long way off. Israel obviously has, I think, by recent estimates, 90 nuclear warheads. It is a nuclear armed state in the Middle East committing a genocide. Iran, given the kind of mutually assured destruction theories of the Cold War, would be foolish not to acquire a nuclear weapon. Not suggesting that anyone having nuclear weapons is necessarily a good thing. But if you were the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran and you looked at what happened to Colonel Gaddafi, if you looked at what happened to Saddam Hussein, if you looked at what happened to the Assads, you'd be getting a nuclear weapon, because the real lesson, you'd be looking at Kim Jong-un and recognizing that he's He's still there. He's doing okay. Nobody has removed him. The United States and Europe and Israel too have created an excellent argument for regimes like Iran to acquire themselves a nuclear weapon as quickly as possible. Here's how the neocons spell out the US national interest in overthrowing the Iranian government and introducing a regime change. Not necessarily a secular democratic regime change, but perhaps an extension of the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Syrian Wahhabi terrorists. With Iran and its component parts turned into a set of client oligarchies, US diplomacy can control Near Eastern oil. And control of the oil has been a cornerstone of US international economic power for a century, thanks to US oil companies operating internationally and also as domestic US producers of oil and gas. Control of Near Eastern oil means control of the vast holdings of US Treasury securities and private sector investments by Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries. The United States holds these OPEC and other foreign investments as hostages, which can be expropriated much as the United States grabbed $300 billion of Russia's monetary savings in the West in 2022. This explains why these countries fear acting in support of the Palestinians or Iranians in today's conflict. But Iran is not only the key to controlling the Near East and its oil and dollar holdings. Iran is a key link for China's Belt and Road program for a new Silk Road of railway transport to the West. If the United States can block it, this interrupts the long transport corridor that China hopes to construct. Iran is also a key to blocking Russian development via the Caspian and access to the south. Under US control, an Iranian climate regime could threaten Russia from its southern flank, bypassing the Suez Canal. So there's a great reason to have a series of great reasons to have this client regime in Western Asia, as I think the terminology is now, which would act as a wonderful barrier to Chinese and Russian designs. Trump, who is no friend of the EU, probably is happy at the thought of Europe losing 20 to 30% of its oil supplies if the Straits of Hormuz are blocked off. America, since Obama, became a net producer of fossil fuels. Since 2012, it's been a net exporter. So it doesn't have to worry so much about fuel imports. Controlling fuel supplies in general is extremely good idea, but it doesn't have to worry so much about imports. If the fuel prices spike, American oil companies can drill, as Trump and his kind of hangers-on put it. And the Trump's kind of desire to rip up environmental restrictions and to authorize new pipelines and new oil wells and all that kind of stuff is based in large part around this of like, well, what if we need to overthrow the regime in Iran or declare war on Iran? We'll need some extra fuel supply, extra sort of fossil fuel supply, in order to prevent prices from spiking. To the neocons, this makes Iran the central pivot on which US national interest is based. If you define that national interest as creating a coercive empire of client states, I think, this is not me by the way, this is the author, I think Trump's warning to Tehran citizens to evacuate the city is just trying to stir up domestic panic as a prelude to the US attempt to mobilize ethnic opposition and try to break up Iran into component parts. That is similar to the US hopes to succeed in breaking up Russia and China into regional ethnicities. That is the US strategic hope for a new international order remaining under its command. I don't think it will succeed. I genuinely don't. I think that under previous conditions, it might have, but we are now not at a point. We're at a point where it becomes more essential for America to do this, and less possible. The prospect of grinding Iran down, I think, is going to be considerably harder than anything America tried to do in Iraq. Iran's a much bigger country. It's much better armed. And the Iranian regime has had a lot longer to prepare. There's no, with Iraq, a kind of a propaganda, disinformation and lying campaign built a sort of pretext that certain people, certain populations in the West could buy into. Oh, you know, this person is really very dangerous, but nobody is buying this now, I don't think. If even Trump supporters, if even Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't buying this, that tells you something. And it tells you that the political will for a hugely costly war with Iran, which probably couldn't be won without a sort of some kind of presence on the ground. And Iran's a huge country. Iran, if you put it in Europe, would run from like the north of England to Naples. That's kind of how, that's the size of it. And from the middle of France to the east of Germany. So it's a very, very big country, and there's almost no chance that anything could happen other than reducing it to a kind of a Syria-like civil warring state, which again might not be the worst thing in the world if you're a neocon. But it just shows that, you know, this is an immensely toxic and destructive imperial ideology, and it will be no doubt with us for a long time to come. But it will also see the diminution of America, just as it did during the Bush years, and what we see in here in some ways, now that Trump seems to have chosen the neocons over his MAGA base, which no doubt he always would, he kind of goes to where power is we see a kind of a recrudescence of the original Bush Junior era, and perhaps the next few years will look more like that and a bit less like Trumpist populism. We shall see. Anyway, as I said, the pace of things is so rapid that we may have answers to all these questions tomorrow. You never know. So stay tuned, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Take good care now. All the best. Bye-bye.
Ever wonder what your lashes are destined for? The cards have spoken. Maybelline New York Mascara does it all. Whether you crave fully fan lashes with Lash Sensational, big, bold volume from the Colossal, a dramatic lift with Falsies Lash Lift, or natural-looking volume from Great Lash, your perfect lash future awaits. Manifest your best mascara today. Shop Maybelline New York and discover your lash destiny. Shop now at Walmart.
This is Paige, the co-host of Giggly Squad. I use Uber Eats for everything, and I feel like people forget that you can truly order anything, especially living in New York City. It's why I love it. You can get Chinese food at any time of night, but it's not just for food. I order from CVS all the time. I'm always ordering from the grocery store. If a friend stops over, I have to order champagne. I also have this thing that whenever I travel, if I'm ever in a hotel room, I never feel like I'm missing something because I'll just Uber Eats it. The amount of times I've had to Uber Eats hair items like hairspray, deodorant, you name it, I've ordered it on Uber Eats. You can get grocery, alcohol, everyday essentials in addition to restaurants and food you love. So in other words, get almost anything with Uber Eats. Order now. For alcohol, you must be legal drinking age. Please enjoy responsibly. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.